to Michael Cremo. I'm a big fan of his. I got tuned in on him through Coast to Coast AM about 5 or 6 years back, and I have to say his work is remarkable. It has opened so many doors in my own research. It has enlightened me to look outside the box on how the human race has evolved, because mainstream science and the mainstream they're into, let's say, Darwinism. Now, Darwinism is okay, but Darwinism isn't 100% correct in everything that Darwinism preaches or teaches. But I'm glad that I see the chat room is lightening up. I welcome you. You can also go to theufobunker.com. I have a chat room there. Become a member there. And also during the interview, if you want to go check out while you're listening, go to Michael Cremo's site, which is MCREMO, which is mcremo.com. Go check it out and learn a little more about him. But we have about 56 minutes remaining, so I want to go ahead and get Michael Cremo on the air. Are you there, sir?
Yes, I am, Mike. It's good to be with you and all your listeners.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Is everything running pretty smooth right now?
I can hear you just fine. How am I coming through?
You sound great. Yeah, to all the listeners, I had to go to my backup. Actually, I'm using my landline, but that's my backup. Usually I use my headset, my microphone, but it's getting a little outdated, and I need to get another one. I keep telling my listeners I need to get a new headset, but I'm waiting for some more money to come in from Uncle Sam, I guess. So tell us a little bit about your background and what inspired you to get into this research about the human race.
Well, I was born in a military family. My father was an intelligence officer in the United States Air Force, and the family moved around a lot to different places in the United States, Hawaii, Europe, other places. So I think that experience opened me up. First of all, the travel opened me up to the idea that there's more than one way of looking at things. There are other ways of looking at things in this world. And also the fact that my father was involved in intelligence got me to understand there are secrets in this world. There are things that go on that most people just don't know about. I grew up in an environment like that. So I think those two things opened me up to the possibility that there is hidden knowledge, there are secrets that most people aren't being told, that there are alternative ways of looking at things besides what's being taught to us in our schools and colleges, where scientists who hold a particular point of view now have a government-enforced monopoly. So when I was in my early 20s, I encountered the ancient Sanskrit writings of India, which told of a human presence on Earth going back many, many millions of years, all the way back to the very beginnings of the history of life on Earth. And this is something that's also there in most of the ancient wisdom traditions, whether we're talking about the Bible, the Koran, the ancient Chinese wisdom, the Australian Aboriginal wisdom, Native American people's wisdom, Pacific Islanders' wisdom. Pretty much they all say that humans have been here since the beginning. Now, they may some agree about when the beginning was. Some people will say a few thousand, some people say a few billion, but whatever, they all pretty much agree that humans like us have been present since the very beginning of the history of life on Earth. So I found that very interesting, and I began to think, is there any physical evidence to support that idea of extreme human antiquity? So first of all, of course, I looked in the standard textbooks of archaeology and anthropology and history, and there I didn't find any such evidence. I found only the evidence that supports the current evolutionary theories of human origins, which tell us that human beings like us first came into existence 100,000, maybe 150,000 years ago, having evolved from more primitive ape-like human ancestors. So in the current textbooks, I found only facts, only evidence that supported that idea. But I decided to look beyond the textbooks. I started looking into original reports by original investigators published in the professional scientific literature, not the textbooks, but the original reports on which the textbooks are based. And when I did that, when I started looking into the original reports of archaeologists published in the scientific literature from the mid-19th century all the way up to the present, I found something very surprising. I found hundreds of reports of evidence for extreme human antiquity. By that, I mean reports of human bones, human artifacts, and human footprints going back many, many, many millions of years, tens of millions, even hundreds of millions of years. So I began to ask myself, well, why is this evidence there in the original scientific reports and it's not present in the textbooks? So I wrote a whole book about this evidence. It's called Forbidden Archaeology with my co-author, Richard Thompson. So that's what got me into this line of research.
I would tell you the book that really inspired me to look outside the box when it comes to our ancient past is The Hidden History of the Human Race.
Well, The Hidden History of the Human Race, Mike, is the abridged version of Forbidden Archaeology. Forbidden Archaeology is 900 pages, so it's a very heavy book.
Yeah.
So we kind of figured that some people aren't going to want to go through 900 pages. So we brought out the same book with the same cases, all the same cases, in a shorter edition called The Hidden History of the Human Race. So that's what you got.
Yes, sir. Yeah, I like to read slow so I can absorb all the material, and I believe 900 pages would have taken me a while, but The Hidden History of the Human Race, it is a remarkable book, and I suggest for my listeners to go check out that book. And also, if you're just tuning in, go to mcremo.com, or just Google Michael Cremo, and page after page will pop up. And if you're a member of coasttocoastam.com, just search his name, Michael Cremo, and he has many shows on there, many shows. What does the term forbidden archaeology mean? What made you come up with that?
Well, it came up because, when I looked at the original scientific reports, I could see all this evidence for extreme human antiquity, and I had to ask myself, well, why isn't it in the textbooks? It just seemed to be forbidden, So I called the book of this evidence Forbidden Archaeology, because that's what it seems to be. It seems to be something that is not mentioned in the textbooks, and the artifacts and the bones may be there in the museum collections, but they're not displayed. If we looked at archaeology as like a big museum, we'd find that people are only let into one tiny little room of that museum, and there they only see the discoveries that support the mainstream theories. But there are other rooms in that big museum of archaeology, so with locks on the doors. So what I've tried to do in my work is take the locks off the doors, let people see what's inside. And what's inside is a huge amount of evidence that just totally contradicts all the theories that are now in the textbooks and which are being promoted on television, on the PBS specials, Nova specials, National Geographic specials, and stuff like that. So that's why I called it Forbidden Archaeology.
I have to say, I just got the newest edition of, or this month's edition of Atlantis Rising, and your article was fabulous. It was great.
Well, I do write a column called The Forbidden Archaeologist in Atlantis Rising magazine. That magazine comes out 6 times a year, and I've been doing this column for about 10 years now. So what I did is I took all those columns and I put them together in a book which is coming out this summer. It's called The Forbidden Archaeologist. It's composed of all those columns from Atlantis Rising magazine.
Fascinating. How far back does intelligent civilized humans go? And how many eras of civilized humans have there been in the past?
Well, the evidence for a human presence goes back hundreds of millions of years, right to the very beginnings of the history of life on Earth. And this evidence can take a few forms. It can take the form of human artifacts. It can take the form of human bones. It can take the form of human footprints. The oldest artifacts that I found in my research come from South Africa. They're round objects, spherical objects, about 1 or 2 inches in diameter. They're made of hematite, which is a naturally occurring type of iron. And they come from South Africa, from a mine in South Africa near a place called Ottosdal in the western Transvaal region of South Africa. And the most interesting feature is the parallel grooves that go around the center of each object. Some have 3 or 4 grooves, some have 2, some just have 1. And what's really interesting about these objects is they're found solidly embedded in mineral deposits over 2 billion years old. So that's really, quite extraordinary. And these objects were given to an independent company of metallurgists to examine because they were shown on an NBC television special called The Mysterious Origins of Man. And before NBC agreed to have them in the program, they said you have to give them to an independent company of metallurgists to examine. So the metallurgists examined them. They said they could not explain how these objects could have formed naturally in the layers of the Earth, because that's the obvious kind of counter-explanation. No, these aren't human artifacts. These are just things that just naturally form in the layers of the Earth. Well, you can say that, but the fact is that these metallurgists could not explain exactly how it could have happened, that these things could have formed with those parallel grooves going around the center of each object, which means they had to have been made by someone with human-like intelligence about over 2 billion, that's B, billion with a B, years ago. So that's one example. And then there's a case of an interesting object that was reported in Scientific American magazine in the year 1852, a beautiful metallic vase with silver inlaid floral patterns was found 15 feet deep in solid rock near Dorchester, Massachusetts, near Boston. And according to geologists of the United States Geological Survey, the age of the layer of rock at that depth, at that place, is about 600 million years. So,
Wow.
I mean, we have to put this into some context. According to the current theories, no human beings at all existed on Earth until about 150,000 years ago. And as far as artwork like that goes, they think that didn't start, I mean, metal vases, they think that didn't start until about 10,000 years ago or 5,000 years ago. So, now if there were just one or two cases like this, maybe you could explain it all away as just some isolated, mysterious, anomalous discoveries. But the fact is that there are hundreds of these cases in the scientific literature the past 150 years, hundreds of cases from all periods in the Earth's history showing that human beings have always been here in one form or another. So that's the kind of evidence that we're talking about.
If you're just now tuning in, I am interviewing Michael Cremo, talking about forbidden archaeology. You can go to his site. It's mcremo.com. Michael, I interviewed another Michael a couple weeks ago, Michael Tillinger. He talked about that the cradle of humankind is from South Africa. And many believe that the cradle of humankind is in Iraq. Tell me what you believe. Where were humans, or where did humans first evolve at?
Well, here's what I think. Human beings have always been present in the universe. It's not that they just, at some particular point in time, came into existence. There have always been living things in the universe. There have always been plants. There have always been animals. There have always been human beings existing in some form or another. Now, at some periods of time, because there are vast cycles in which universes are created and destroyed many times over in the course of billions and billions of years, it may be that at particular points in time, the forms of human beings and other types of living things are not visibly manifest. But at some higher level of reality, the forms are always there. And when the universes become manifest, the forms of the living things, including human beings, also become manifest. And this idea can be found in ancient Greek philosophy. There was an ancient Greek philosopher called Plato. He had this idea that the forms of living things, they exist on some higher abstract level of reality, and periodically those forms are made manifest in the realm of matter in which we inhabit now. So I believe something like that. The human form has always existed, but during the vast cycles of creation and destruction of universes that go on over the course of billions and billions and billions of years, sometimes those forms are manifested on this level of reality and sometimes not. But when they're not manifested here, they're existing at some higher level of reality.
Yeah, what type of test or methods do you use to determine the age of an archaeological artifact?
Well, there are many methods that can be used. Of course, what I'm doing is I'm not so much out there myself in the field. What I've been looking into is the history of archaeology. So my method is this, to say to scientists, okay, according to methods that you consider reliable, here's a layer of rock that is so and so many millions of years old. So how do you explain the presence in this very ancient layer of rock of this human bone, this human artifact, or this human footprint? So, there are some methods that you can use to directly date bone, or something like that. But, for example, there's the carbon-14 method, but that only works back to about 100,000 years. Beyond that, there's no more carbon-14 left to measure. So there aren't any scientific methods that will allow you to directly date the age of a bone. For example, if scientists find the bone of a dinosaur, they think, well, that's got to be at least 65 million years old because that's when they believe a huge comet hit the Earth and caused the dinosaurs to become extinct. So there's no method that they can use to directly date the age of a dinosaur bone. So they have to, there are methods that will allow them to date the layers of rock in which the dinosaur bones are found. And if you can show that the dinosaur bone didn't get in there from some higher, more recent level, that it really belongs in the layer of rock in which it's found, then it's got to be 65 million years old or older, and they determine its age not by directly dating the bone, but by dating the age of the layers of rock in which it is found. So most of the human bones and artifacts that I'm dealing with in forbidden archaeology are millions of years old. So there are no methods that you could use to directly date them. You have to date them according to the age of the layers of rock in which they are found. Now, some people might say, but how do we know the methods of dating the rock are accurate? Well, I tend to think they are accurate. They're kind of based on the known rates of decay of different radioactive elements and things like that. But still, you could have some doubts about it. But here's the way that I operate. You have to have some kind of framework for discussion. So when you're talking with scientists who are interested in these questions. So what I do is I tell them, okay, according to methods that you consider reliable, like the potassium-argon method and the uranium series method and the zircon fission track method, the age of this layer of rock is 100 million years old. So how do you explain the presence of this human skeleton in that layer of rock, or this human footprint, or this human artifact? So they've got a choice. They could either just admit that all their dating methods are completely unreliable and wrong, which is fine with me, or they could just change their ideas about the origin of the human species, which I think is the proper thing for them to do. Either way,
how. Yes, sir. Explain how these artifacts and some of this evidence of civilization that flourished hundreds of thousands of years ago, or possibly even millions of years ago, explain how they make it through the millennia and through time without, or staying intact, without decaying, or is it possible for artifacts to go through the time? Because it's a little confusing for me, but you can't rule it out, though.
Well, sure. And I think what you're talking about is very important, because I don't think we've got a complete record in the layers of the rock, because a lot of things aren't going to make it through millions of years or hundreds of thousands of years. For example, if millions of years ago there was a civilization that was using laptop computers and iPads and things like that, you might ask, well, why don't we find any computers in these layers of rock that are millions of years old. And you brought up a very good point, is that a lot of things aren't going to survive very long over the course of many, many millions of years. For example, the plastics in a computer are, after a few hundred years, going to dissolve. I mean, they might last for a little while, but they'll eventually decay. And the metals that are in a computer are going to oxidize.
Yeah.
Unless there are some very, very special conditions that completely, seal off the artifact, the computer, from oxygen. So, I mean, we may see a computer sitting on our desk and it looks pretty solid, but after several thousand years, it's not going to look like the computer that's sitting on your desk. Like I said,
it's not going to look the same after 5 years.
Right. Well, absolutely. And so that's why a lot of the evidence that I report in Forbidden Archaeology is not of the nature of computers. It's of the nature of stone tools and weapons and things like that. Because say if at the same time, say 100 million years ago, what if you had some people using some laptop computers and some people using some stone tools? After 100 million years, the computer is not going to be there anymore. It'll have dissolved and oxidized away. But those stone tools will still be there. So that's why a lot of the evidence that I report in Forbidden Archaeology is made of stone, because stone lasts a long time, whereas things made of metal usually don't. Unless one exception is gold, because gold does not oxidize. That's one of the reasons we consider gold to be a very valuable metal. That's why the price of gold keeps going up. It's considered valuable. One of the reasons it's valuable, it's not because of its yellow color, but because it doesn't oxidize. It lasts for a long time, and it's a very rare, reasonably rare metal. So that may be one reason why some of the very ancient artifacts of metal that are found are made of gold. For example, there was the case of that was reported in the Morrisonville Times newspaper from the year 1892. It told of a woman who was putting a piece of coal into a coal-burning stove, and she broke open, this piece of coal, and inside she found a gold chain 10 inches long. Now, from that report, we were able to tell what mine the coal came from, and we went to the geologists of the state of Illinois. As I said, this was a case from Morrisonville in the state of Illinois. The geologists from the state government of Illinois told us that the coal from the mine that this coal came from is about 300 million years old. So you've got a case there of a gold chain being preserved for 300 million years. And also in the state of Illinois, there's also a case that's reported in a scientific journal called The Geologist, published in the year 1862. And it told of a complete human skeleton that was found 90 feet below the surface of the ground in Macoupin County in the state of Illinois. And according to the report, above the skeleton there was a thick layer of slate rock that was unbroken. And that's an important detail, because one way that people try to explain away evidence like this is they said, well, the skeleton must have come down from some higher, more recent level. See, the age of the formation below the slate rock in which the skeleton was found is, according to modern geologists of the state of Illinois, about 300 million years old. That's the same age as the gold chain, that was also found in Morrisonville, Illinois, in another location in the same state. So you've got that gold chain, 300 million years old. You've got a human skeleton, 300 million years old. It adds up to a pretty interesting picture.
Did humans and dinosaurs coexist together?
Well, I think they did, yes, and there appears to be
advanced civilization, or was it just primitive beings?
Well, there are some limits to what we can demonstrate. If we want to talk about advanced civilizations or not so advanced civilizations, the first thing we have to have is human beings. You know, so I think I can show at least that. And for a lot of the details about the level of the civilization, you know, we may have to do further research to find out all those details. But whether it was an advanced civilization or a primitive civilization, the very first thing has to be you have to have some human beings present. So I think I can at least show that. And I don't claim to have answered every question. I think there's a lot more research to be done. I think the evidence that I uncovered in Forbidden Archaeology is just the tip of the iceberg, really. I think we need a whole new generation of archaeologists and geologists and paleontologists with more open minds to go out there and look for more of this stuff so we can answer those questions about what was their level of civilization. But we also have to keep in mind that there's two ways of knowing about the past. One is by what we can find in the layers of the rocks, and the other is by studying the records that were left, you know, by these ancient civilizations. For example, the ancient Sanskrit writings of India speak of huge cities with palaces and government buildings and all kinds of things that existed hundreds of millions of years ago on Earth. These ancient writings also speak of spacecraft that could travel from planet to planet. They speak of weapons resembling our modern atomic weapons. They speak of people being able to calculate time according to the movement of atoms. So you've got some pretty interesting things in these ancient records that were left by some of these ancient civilizations. So those could be a guide for future research. But on this specific point of human beings coexisting with the dinosaurs, there's a site in Texas called the Paluxy River site near Glen Rose.
I was just about to ask about that too.
Yeah, now I didn't mention those in my book Forbidden Archaeology, where they've got some footprints there alongside human footprints alongside dinosaur footprints. And the reason I didn't mention them in Forbidden Archaeology is that when I was doing the research for that book, I found that the scientist Henry Morris Jr., who originally reported them, he was a Christian creationist, a scientist, he had withdrawn his claims. He had said in a scientific publication, he said, originally I thought these were human footprints alongside the dinosaur footprints. But upon further study, he said, I've decided they're not human footprints. They're actually dinosaur footprints that have been subjected to erosion. And these eroded dinosaur footprints look a little bit like human footprints. So because of that, because the scientist who had originally claimed that these were human footprints had changed his mind and decided they weren't human footprints, I decided, well, I'm just going to keep this case in a file, and when I get some more definite information about it, maybe I'll put it in one of my books. So later, there was an archaeology student from Texas who got in touch with me and asked if she could help out with my research. So I told her, I'd like you to go up to that Glen Rose Paluxy River site, and you take a look at those footprints and you tell me what you think of them. based on your archaeological studies. So she went up there and she actually participated in some new excavations where they uncovered new human footprints alongside dinosaur footprints. And on the basis of her studies and information that she provided from other researchers who were present there, she concluded these are human footprints. They're not just dinosaur footprints that have eroded so that they look like human footprints. These are genuine human footprints. So on that basis, and I'm going to include them as evidence that humans were existing at the same time as the dinosaurs over 65 million years ago, I'm going to include that case in a new book I'm putting together now.
That's fascinating. And we have about 20 minutes remaining, a little over 20 minutes remaining, and I want to switch course a tad and talk about devolution. What is devolution?
Well, after people read my book, Forbidden Archaeology, they asked me a question. They said, well, you've got all this evidence that contradicts the current evolutionary theories of human origins, so how do you think human beings got here? So to answer that question, I wrote a book called Human Devolution. And what I proposed in that book is that, before we even ask the question, where did human beings come from, we should first of all ask the question, what is a human being? Now, many scientists today are going to say that a human being is simply a complex organization of chemical elements. That's all there is to it. We're purely material beings. We're just a very complex organization of chemicals. That's all there is to it. And as far as our consciousness is concerned and mind, that's all just temporary bioelectrical activity in the brain. Once you disorganize the chemicals in the brain, there's no more consciousness, no more love, no more mind, none of that. So under that point of view, matter is what's primary. Matter is the only thing that really exists. So I decided that's not true. When I looked at all the evidence, it seemed more reasonable to me that a human being is made of three substances. Ordinary matter, the chemical elements, that's part of what a human being is, yes. But beyond that, there is a subtle mind element with some very unusual powers like remote viewing and mind over matter, psychokinesis, things like that. And then beyond that, there is a conscious self that can exist completely apart from matter, apart from the body. And there's evidence for that in the form of medical studies of out-of-body experiences where a person just leaves their body and they look down and they see the doctors and nurses trying to revive them. There's a lot of evidence for this. So when I speak of consciousness, I don't mean temporary byproducts of bioelectrical activity in the brain. I mean something real in its own right that exists apart from the chemical elements, apart from matter. So what I'm proposing is that we originally begin as beings of pure consciousness on some higher level of reality where we exist in harmony with the source of all conscious beings and with all other conscious beings. But some conscious beings, they come down. They come down from that level of pure consciousness. Some people would call it spirit. So they come down from that level of pure consciousness and they become covered by matter. So that's what I mean by devolution. As conscious beings, we do not evolve up from matter, as most scientists now believe. Rather, we devolve or come down from that level of pure consciousness and we become covered by a body made of matter. So that's what I mean by devolution, but I think it's a process that can be reversed. We can restore consciousness to its original pure state.
Very fascinating. And I totally agree. I always explain consciousness to people like it's the internet. It holds all the knowledge and information in the world, and that is what I believe consciousness is. But many people don't have the keyboard to tap into the consciousness. Explain what you think consciousness is.
Well, I think using the example of a computer is a good way to look at it.
But most people just don't have a keyboard, though.
Yeah, well, here's how I would look at it. If you look at the computer hardware, you know, the physical hardware of the computer, that's like your physical body.
Yeah.
And then if you look at the software that lets you interact with the hardware, that software would be like what I call the mind. And then beyond that, there is the computer user, who's completely apart from the software and the hardware, but he uses the software to interact with the hardware to do stuff. Just like, you know, I may be using a word processing program to
Could the
write.
user be intuition?
Huh?
Could the user be intuition?
Yes,
people say I'm very intuitive.
Of course. That's part of. So the computer and the software are not conscious. They don't have any intuition. They don't have any awareness. It's the computer user who is conscious, aware, with intuition and things like that. So what I'm proposing is that we, as conscious selves, have the same kind of relation to our body and mind as a computer user has to the computer software and hardware. In other words, we use our mind, we use our body as instruments, but really, as conscious beings, we're different from them. Just like you're different from your computer, you're different from your software. You're a conscious being, and you just use the software and the hardware. Now, the problem is, if you use it long enough, you begin to identify with it. You begin thinking, well, that's what I am. I'm my computer, or I'm my software. But really, you're not. You can get up, you can walk away from that computer, you can walk away from that software. You're different. So in the same way, we are different than our minds, just like we can observe our minds operating. We can say, well, today, mentally, I feel happy, mentally, I feel sad. But as a conscious being, you're aware of that. You say, my mind feels like this, my mind feels like that. Or we say, my body feels like this, my body feels like that. That means, as a conscious being, you are different than the mind. You are different than the body. And so that's what I'm proposing that we are. Originally, we're beings of pure consciousness. We have devolved, come down into these bodies made of matter.
Man, you explained that so perfectly. I just learned something tonight. But if our consciousness is devolving or degrading, which I agree, what are humans turning into, and what is awaiting us in the future?
Well, that all depends on how we make conscious choices, because basically there are two types of conscious selves in the world. There's one type of conscious self that is trying to go back to the original position, understanding that I'm a being in pure consciousness. All other people are beings of pure consciousness. We all come from the same source. We're all part of the same family. There's no need to be fighting with each other. There's no need to be making so many complicated arrangements to try to dominate and exploit and control the material resources of this earth. And we're destroying, actually, the earth in the process of doing that. So there are some people who are becoming more and more deeply entangled in this process of material identification, material exploitation, domination, control, conflict, competition. They're becoming more and more deeply involved in that. And there are others who are going in the opposite direction, who are trying to understand, yes, I'm a being of pure consciousness. We're all beings of pure consciousness. Let's try to satisfy our material necessities in the most simple, natural, and efficient way possible while putting most of our conscious energy into returning to that original higher level of pure consciousness. So the more people you have like that, the better this world's going to be, because such people will be trying to stop the needless conflicts that are going on, stop the environmental destruction. They'll try to find ways to live on this planet in the most simple, natural, efficient, and peaceful way possible. But others, they're taking us in another direction. More conflict, more competition, more involvement and entanglement in all of these things. So the future of humanity really depends on the choices that each of us makes. The more people that are making the right choices, the better world it's going to be. The more people that are making the wrong choices, the worse it's going to be for everybody.
Does the Vedic cosmological cycle called the Kali Yuga have any importance of how our consciousness works or evolves?
Well, yes, you could say. Most of the spiritual traditions speak of time going in vast cycles of ages. The ancient Greeks and Romans, they had an idea like that the earth goes through a golden age, and then a silver age, and then a bronze age, and then an iron age. Or in the biblical tradition, there's also the idea of an original golden age, and then a process of degradation and a possibility of renewal. So in most spiritual traditions, you have this idea of a series of ages going on. Like each year, if you're in a temperate climate, there's spring, there's summer, there's fall, there's winter. So according to the climate of the season or the age, as a conscious being, you have to adjust. As a conscious being, if you see winter is coming, well, then you have to make some preparation for keeping yourself warm and keeping yourself fed, during the winter time. So similarly, according to the ancient Vedic teachings, time goes in vast cycles like that. Goes through cycles of 4 ages, which repeat again and again and again. So it starts out with a golden age. It's called the Satya Yuga. Then there's another age in which things get a little worse. Then there's a third age in which they get a little bit worse. And then finally there's the Kali Yuga, in which things are really getting pretty bad. And there's predictions that people will be overtaxed, for example, by their governments. This was foreseen thousands of years ago, that as the Kali Yuga came, people would be facing huge burdens of taxation, so much so that they just want to run away and go off and live in the forest and get away from the cities. So there are predictions like that. Now, just because it's going to rain doesn't mean that you have to get wet. You can put up a shelter. You can put up an umbrella and shelter yourself and shelter others. So just because winter is coming doesn't mean you have to freeze to death, but you have to adjust. You have to make preparations. You have to take.
You have to have a strong hard drive.
Yeah. So so according to the ancient Vedic wisdom, it is the Kali Yuga, which means it's an age of darkness and quarrel and hypocrisy. But that doesn't mean that any particular individual has to become overcome by that. Like I said, just because it's going to rain doesn't mean you have to get wet. But if you don't make adequate preparation, you are going to get wet. You are going to be influenced by the age in which you live.
Exactly. If at first we were spiritual beings instead of physical beings, how did the spiritual move into the physical form?
Well, say as human beings, we're normally meant to live on the land. If we want to live in an alien element like water, if we want to live under the water for more than a few seconds, we're going to need a vehicle that will allow us to function under the water, like a submarine or a diving suit. So naturally, we're meant to just be living on the land. We don't need any vehicle. But if we want to live under the water, we're going to need a vehicle. So where do those vehicles come from? Well, they come from scientists and engineers who understand that if a human being wants to live under the water, it's going to need a vehicle. So these scientists and engineers, they design and build these vehicles, submarines, diving suits, and things like that, so you can live under the water. So it's a similar thing that goes on in the universal level. Normally, we're meant to exist on the level of pure consciousness, but if we become attracted to the material energy and we want to exist within that material energy, we're going to need a vehicle that will allow us to function in the world of matter. So where do those vehicles come from? Same like submarines, same like diving suits. They come from higher intelligent beings who understand that if a conscious self is going to exist within the world of matter, it's going to need a vehicle made of matter that will allow us to function there. Now, this idea has become very popular these days from this film Avatar, that a lot of people have seen, where you've got this guy who functions on another level of reality through a vehicle that allows them to function in that level of reality. So, or there was also a film a few years before, called The Matrix, where you have people that are experiencing reality through computer bodies that they've been given. So it's sort of like that originally we're meant to exist on the level of pure consciousness. And many conscious selves, they never decide to come to the world of matter. But for those who do, for whatever reason, come to this world of matter, they need a vehicle that will allow them to function there. Just like if you're going to live under the water, you need a vehicle like a submarine or a diving suit. So where do those human vehicles come from? They're designed and built by higher intelligences in the cosmos who understand that, yes, if we're going to function in the world of matter, we're going to need vehicles that allow us to function there.
We have about 4.5 minutes left, and I got to get this question in. Many are fearing 2012 due to Hollywood and the media. What message were the Mayans and other civilizations across the world from our ancient past? What were they trying to tell us?
Well, this idea comes from studies of the Mayan calendar, but those who have looked into it a little bit deeply, say like John Major Jenkins, for example, a great scholar, someone who I know personally, they tell us that the Mayans, they had this idea that time goes in vast cycles lasting hundreds of thousands of years, and